We're talking about the Charlotte Hornets season preview with Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I'm doubtful. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, all the way through to September the 22nd, FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms, so give us the thumb up, give us the double bang, give us the comments, do all that now. Basketball Monster is open for the 24-25 season, so you can go ahead and check out all the projections over there. Import your leagues. Everything is tailored to your league. You put your settings in. You import your rosters. The projections adjust based on the categories or the point scoring system that you have. So there'll be people who ask me, do you have points league rankings? Like, yes. It is just a bunch. I do projections for every player, and then everything like that gets converted into your particular league settings. And you can have multiple leagues on there, and you set them all up the way you need to. So that is open, and we are done. We're done. I'm done explaining that for now. I'm sure we'll talk about it more at another point. But we are going to talk about the Charlotte Hornets. So let's do it. He's back. He's on the show. He's ready to face the heat for the Charlotte Hornets. It is Walker Mehl from Locked On Hornets. Walker, welcome back to the show.
I appreciate it. I imagine there's going to be a lot of injury talk just because this is like a tradition unlike any other.
Well, it was actually doubtful that you would come on this show today. For
yes.
3 weeks in a row, I kept asking you. You said, no, I'm doubtful for this date. And then eventually, to break with tradition, you actually did return to action. It was amazing that the doubtful tag turned into something that worked out in the long run. But here we are to talk about the Hornets, completely unrelated. There's nothing similar between those things, and anything we're talking about here, of course, this is all very much straightforward and above board as we talk about this team who annoys us and thrills us at times, and we all go and go, oh, but what if? And then, of course, the answer is, of course not. Maybe.
Josh, real quickly, I remember last year on Locked On Hornets, one of our favorite things to do was to go to your Twitter handle and see just how frustrated you were with the team, with the social media team, for saying, yeah, Mark Williams, like there's totally a chance that he plays tonight. It's a possibility. And then he wouldn't play. And then so we would reserve probably a good 15 seconds to read whatever angry tweet you had with the Hornets and then move on with our regularly scheduled programming. But it was a feature on the show.
I did not know you did that. I think it got to about 10 games around, I had enough of this. And every day I was like, oh yeah, doubtful. Is he? Yeah, doubtful again for the 11th consecutive game. And then, of course, he never, ever returned. And we will talk about that soon. But what we are going to start off with here, Walker, is talking about the players that arrived to the Hornets in the offseason. Of course, they got themselves involved in a trade that got them Josh Green. They drafted Tijan Salin. KJ Simpson, who's on a two-way. For some reason, they picked up Moussa Diabate on a two-way as well. And then Taj Gibson, out of absolutely nowhere, jumps in. Just quickly touching on Taj Gibson. I saw Doug tweet about this when it went down. But, this is the sort of thing that the Hornets have been, calling out for, I guess. Like, a guy who's not necessarily going to play, but, can come in and, slap some heads around if need be.
Absolutely. Just some veteran leadership because – and some reason, I go back to the Suns of the early 2010s, I guess, when they would just constantly tank and get a whole bunch of young players, but they never got a whole bunch of veteran players to help those guys and have some coaches on the court. Well, it makes total sense to me. One, you actually do kind of have a need at power forward just for a little tiny bit of depth, but more so than just him going on the court. Just helping him out in the locker room, real presence, a grown-up in the room as we're trying to shift culture and all that stuff here in Charlotte. So that's why it made sense to me. And Marvin Williams used to be that guy that was on the court serving as that role. And now maybe you could just have an old Taj Gibson, defensive-minded, helping these young guys out. So made sense when they brought him in, but you're right, it did come out of nowhere.
It was a shame that James Bouknight couldn't fill that role, but unfortunately we'll see where he ends up in his career as we move forward.
Right.
But the biggest addition for the team you have mentioned is Josh Green, who comes across in that trade with the Mavericks. Jumped, I think it was the Klay Thompson deal. The Hornets just got in there just to help the Mavericks with their cap stuff. They did pay, I think, a draft pick or two to get Green in.
Second rounders. Yeah, that was it.
Yep. So they paid something. It's not a huge amount, but they bring Green in. He had the extension from the Mavs last offseason. He had opportunities. I'd say he probably fell away during the year, but change of scenery can help. Why do you think that obviously the list is not huge of the guys they brought in, but what are you expecting that Green can bring to this team?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at long-term, then I guess you could, go with Tijan Salon as the big-time acquisition. But if we're just going for this upcoming season, for the spirit of the game, it's Josh Green. He does a decent amount of the little stuff that the Hornets just don't have on this roster otherwise. For a couple of examples, the Hornets have just been really bad at hitting corner threes the last couple of years. So Josh Green, who got a lot of them, Luka Doncic penetrating, fireball into the corner, Josh Green, whoever, as the recipient, knock it down. Green was average at hitting those shots, but that's a huge step up. We will gladly welcome average from corner three land here in Charlotte. So that's one thing. We don't have a lot of rim pressure either, right? It's not necessarily been LaMelo Ball's strong suit. It's not Brandon Miller's strong suit. It wasn't coming out of college. Miles Bridges has settled for a lot of mid-range jumpers. He settled for a lot of those over this past season. It used to be a strong suit of his, getting downhill, just being a force in space. But last year, he kind of took a step back from that. So Green provides a little rim pressure. He finishes at the rim when he does get there, not necessarily taking guys off of the dribble, but if you can just create some space, right? Rotate, weak side, Green taking advantage and taking those guys off the dribble, attacking closeouts. Maybe that's how you start to see what he can do with the ball in his hands. But really just somebody that can come in, be a nice enough spacer, a good enough shooter, even if he's a little reluctant at times, can still knock down the shot. The 3-point numbers are pretty good over the last 3 years. They're decent enough. And so if you're used to having played with two high usage guys in Dallas, like Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, you're going to get a lot of that too here in Charlotte, where he's not even the third offensive option. You're talking about LaMelo, high usage guy, Brandon Miller. I expect to see a big growth in his usage coming up this season as well. So not all that abnormal or that foreign of a position for him. I think this was a smart piece of business. And Gabe Plotkin and Rick Schnall, the two owners of this team, they were interested in Josh Green at the deadline. So it was interesting. It was, okay, here's Jeff Peterson now calling the shots personnel-wise. But the Hornets were linked to Josh Green at the deadline before Jeff Peterson was even hired. That was the last hurrah for Mitch Kupchak. And really, it wasn't even Mitch Kupchak calling the shots. It was the two owners that were making some of the basketball decisions. But the Dallas Mavericks decided they did not want to include Josh Green in a deal that landed them PJ Washington. And instead, it was just a top 2 protected first in 2027. So Green, they eventually end up with anyway. And they get him for a couple second-round picks. I thought it was a good piece of business, and he'll come in and play an important role right away for this squad, and he can just help them out in some of the areas that they need help with.
Yeah, they've been running for the last few years with that LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier backcourt, which Rozier is obviously a little bit undersized, but they're more offensive-focused guys, whereas Green obviously works more defensively and doesn't need the ball in his hand, so it is a change-up, and I think that's needed when you bring in a Brandon Miller that they did last season as well. Just, again, that change and having the pieces that fit in the right spots is always a key way, I think, to look at things. And, having a Trey Mann who filled that role at the end of last season doesn't really make that level of sense to be playing in amongst all those guys. So that's where I think there is quite a bit of sense with bringing him in. We're going to talk about the guys that left the team. Not that there's a huge amount going on there. And then we'll get into some of the projected lineups in just a sec. But today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. The people in Charlotte, well, they hope that passion is a key ingredient in winning NBA championships, and they definitely hope that patience is, because they've been waiting a while. But passion, drive, and patience are the things that eBay Motors knows delivers that championship, whether it is through fantasy sports or real sports, or looking after your number one ride or die. Because everything at eBay Motors, it's there. Whatever you want for your car, all the parts that you need are there. There's over 122 million of them. That's quite a bit if you don't know how numbers work. That's a lot of parts. And whatever you need for your car, it's going to be there. And one of the best things is the eBay Guaranteed Fit, because out of those 122 million parts, well, I'll tell you, some of them won't fit your car. That's just a little secret. They didn't want me to tell you that. But if it doesn't fit, well, eBay Guaranteed Fit means that you get your money back. So whatever it is, bumpers, LED headlights, roof racks, maybe it's a sticker that says LaMelo Ball drives my other car, whatever it is, I'm sure eBay Motors has it right there for you. So go over to eBay Motors and check it out and keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to US customers. Walker, I asked all of the hosts here who's the biggest loss on the team, and your answer was no one really, and I think that's correct, because Davis Bertans and Alexei Pokusevsky are gone, and Bryce McGowan's and JT Thor and Amari Bailey, and you're right. The correct response to that is, like, who cares? Like, it's not that big of a deal. I'm sure it matters for all of these men individually, but in terms of where this team goes, there's nothing particularly interesting about those players. So I just want to move straight on and talk about your projected starting group, and it does include the aforementioned Josh Green alongside LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, and Mark Williams. I don't think anyone would argue with the majority of those. Josh Green is the one that I think people might have, maybe not even an argument, but maybe a disagreement. There'll be a lot of people who say, well, we start Brandon Miller at the 2 and Bridges at the 3 and Grant Williams plays at the 4, or they'll start Trey Mann, or whatever it is that they think will happen. I agree with you that this is the configuration that they will likely go with, but it's a new coach, so we don't 100% know. Would it make any sense to have Grant Williams in that group, or does that just get a little bit too, the guys sort of playing not their ideal spots?
No, I think it makes total sense. I think it will be this one, obviously, but that would be the only other argument I could see, is having Grant Williams go to the 4, Miles Bridges go to the 3. And Grant Williams provided a decent amount of shooting for this team last year. Good shooter. And the rebounding woes weren't existent with Charlotte like they have been in previous seasons. Like a really bad rebounder, if you look at some of the advanced stats with Boston and Dallas, but that wasn't true. And Steve Clifford valued Grant a lot out there on the court with some of his physicality, playing defense down low. He did bring an attitude to this team last year when there wasn't a lot of attitude, and just the guy's playing for a losing team again. I think you saw the change of scenery give PJ Washington a pep in his step. It's just kind of how it was last year. Steve Clifford was trying to do the best he could, but even he admitted that he wasn't the right guy for the job anymore, and he stepped down before the end of the regular season. They just moved on to Charles Lee after the season was over, but Steve Clifford was not going to go into next season thinking he had the job. He stepped down before that. So it was just down in the dumps for a while, right? Like, that's just kind of how the team has been over the last couple of years, with expectations to compete for at least a play-in spot. And it just hasn't happened with all of the injuries. Grant Williams gives them that. I think he will come off of the bench. I think the reason for that is, if you have Josh Green that can fill in the gaps, just kind of like we talked about with why he was the biggest acquisition, Miles Bridges still needs to find a way in the starting lineup. So, of course, he would take over that 4 spot, even with Grant Williams playing primarily a power forward spot, and then Mark Williams finishing out the front court. This one makes the most sense for me, but you'll see Grant Williams, you'll see some of those lineups that we're talking about with Brandon going to the 2, having Miles at the 3, Grant at the 4. The only other thing that would be interesting, Steve Clifford seemed to value Brandon and that size at shooting guard a lot. I don't know what Charles Lee thinks about Brandon, whether he's more of a 2 or a 3. You would think the general archetype that he brings, it's among the most valuable, probably the most valuable in the NBA. Guy that's 6'9", can handle the rock, defend, and you place him over there at the 3. That's great. But Cliff really liked utilizing Brandon with all that size out there in the backcourt. That's where he found some value. So that might be interesting if Charles Lee was hell-bent on making sure Brandon was at the 2. Maybe that's how you see Grant Williams at the 4. But even so, you can maybe have Green and Miller interchangeable a little bit. So, yeah, that's why I settled on this starting lineup.
I think you'll see Josh Green and Grant Williams play similar minutes anyway, so I don't think it really matters a huge amount who starts. Like, it's very easy for one of them to start and come off the bench or interchange and both play 28 minutes or whatever it is. The other thing that's really interesting about you're talking about size is I think Grant Williams and Josh Green are the same height. Like, I think, like Grant Williams is like listed 6'6", and Green is 6'5", and Miller's like taller than both of them. So what the hell does any of this even mean, like these positions? Like, Grant Williams is playing as a forward. He's shorter than the guy that's playing the point guard position. Like it's just it's a little bit weird the way that sometimes you'd love to designate guys when in reality, like, even an inch
beefier, a lot of beef though.
That is true. He's probably the same width as two LaMelos. Let's talk about the projected bench. Two of these guys came across from the Gordon Hayward trade: Vasiljevic and Trey Mann. Cody Martin and his ever-present knee problems, Grant Williams and Nick Richards. Again, really hard to argue with any of this. Both Misic and Mann played sizable roles at the end of last season, and there'll be plenty of people who had them on fantasy rosters who'll be looking for more from them this season, but it is going to be pretty hard for those guys to replicate that level of production that we saw, given the fact that half the team was missing. But that's a relatively, and one of the criticisms we've always had, Walker, going back years, whether I was talking to Doug or talking to you on this team, it's like, can this team get like a backup point guard ever? Like last year, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, when they didn't have one, and then like 4 games in, they had to sign Ish Smith off the street to play backup point guard because they didn't have anyone. And now, like, Misic is a very, very strong backup point guard. Trey Mann could be a backup point guard. They've finally addressed the problem.
We have depth. It's a miracle. No, Hornets ball, because we have not had a backup Hornets point guard in forever. Like, we're having to go with the Brian Roberts of the world.
Brian Roberts, wow.
Like, whew, buddy. Like, we're having to go back to even find people that you felt decent enough about. They lucked into DSJ. Like, the Dennis Smith Jr. experiment, it worked out really well, especially defensively. But remember, they picked him up right at the beginning of the season 2 years ago. And it wasn't, I think, any shrewd business. It's just, hey, we need to go get a body. DSJ is out there. So be it. We'll sign someone that can play the position. You're right. They actually have some depth. And Micic, he's kind of been thrown out there as trade bait for a while. We had the report how Denver is interested in Micic. It makes sense. Jokic, Micic, excellent two-man game in the Olympics. Micic was good off the bench for Serbia, and Jokic and Micic are buddies. So it makes sense that Jokic might decide to throw his weight around a little bit and force, I don't know, whatever it would take, Zeke Naji, whatever it would take to go get Micic. But if he's playing here, like, he was really good for us last season, Josh, and we had like the kind of joke. It was a fake joke, fake being serious. The first 2 weeks of April, we were joking that Micic deserved Eastern Conference Rookie of the Month award, and he was taking it away from Brandon Miller. Brandon said enough of that. The final 2 weeks of April, he took that award back. But Micic was the leader in the clubhouse. Like, he was the best. And Trey Mann, just I don't know about a pleasant surprise, because I think there were some Trey Mann truthers out there, but he was fun for this team. I think he fixed some of the, what are the right shots you should be taking? Okay, now he's hitting. Yeah, now he's hitting the right shots. And so that was nice to see. There were some defensive plays from Trey too, where there's one thing to be anticipatory and get your hands out in passing lanes, but he would just outright read exactly where the pass was going, and he wouldn't get his hand out there. He would just intercept it and then turn it into 2. Like, it was fun to see him get out in passing lanes and show some of that anticipation. You're right. We have some depth. This was the hardest question I think you asked me, to fill out everything that you go through with these previews, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Josh, you can make a case. You said who are the 4 or 5 that fill out the rest of the rotation, right? Grant Williams, Trey Mann, Vasiljevic, Nick Richards. Those are the easy 4.
Yep.
Cody Martin, Charles Lee is a defensive guy. If Cody is healthy, I think he would like that archetype player. Seth Curry, that brought him back. Right. I thought Seth was good. Like, he was actually a bailout in the half-court offense type of guy for them last year, but he got hurt playing some good ball. Now you bring in 6th overall pick, Tijan Salon, crazy raw, but 6th overall picks, they play usually. Yep. So I actually think you'll see him in Greensboro, the G League affiliate, for a while, but it's not crazy to think that Salon could play, especially if there is a little bit of a need for some power forward depth. And then Nick Smith Jr. Like, I really think they like him a lot. I don't think he's going to be on the court at the beginning, but talking with Josh Longstaff, their assistant coach, and Charles Lee this offseason, I had a chance to interview both of them. They threw a ton at Nick Smith Jr. in Summer League. They put him on the best perimeter offensive player, so they threw a lot at him as far as a defensive assignment goes. They were asking him to make decisions. They really like him. When these new coaches come in and they hitch their wagon to a certain guy and make that their personal project, Brandon Miller, Mark Williams are up there. Nick Smith Jr. is too. So if they like him enough, then perhaps if there's a trade of Micic, an injury, of course, we know that they've been privy to that. Maybe NSJ sees some time. But yeah, this was the hardest decision for me to try to come up with when you asked me this question.
I think the most important part in the news you brought there is a guy by the name of Josh Longstaff on this team, which coincidentally was my nickname back in college. We'll be back to talk more. We'll be back to talk more about the Hornets in just a sec, including some key players to watch and some injury updates. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You've heard me talk a lot about FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook, of course. Well, now they've got something a little bit different for you. All the way through to September the 22nd, all FanDuel customers bet $5, and then you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with a YouTube TV base plan, you're able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is that Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So if you head across to FanDuel.com/lockedon now, you can get America's #1 sportsbook. You can get that free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. You can check out all of the future bets for the NBA and the NFL and bets on the Panthers preseason games or on the Hornets and their chances to make the playoffs. It's all over there. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. Walker, we could have spoken for 25 minutes on the injury updates on this team. We won't, but we will talk quickly because, first of all, I won't talk about Mr. Doubtful himself. We'll get to that in a second. But let's get into the key one here. Let's talk about the king of ankle braces, LaMelo Ball. Obviously, barely played the last 2 years with multiple ankle tweaks. The report earlier this week or late last week about him, committing to wearing ankle braces for this season. I just put something out there. People will be like, LaMelo, you can't ever trust him. He's never going to play. I'll always point back and go, he played 75 games in his second season. So that part's already not true. He can get through a season. I would say that the games played number the last 2 seasons is maybe deflated by 50 or 60% because of the, let's just say, lack of eagerness to win games in the final 2.5 months of the season. How would you view those ankle injuries to Ball? Obviously the one where he had the fracture in his ankle, okay, that he wasn't coming back. But last season there was so much uncertainty, and by uncertainty I mean the team refused to tell us a single thing about what was actually happening. But the feeling was that he could have come back if it was necessary, but they were like, let's just get this right and let's lose some more games. That's the general consensus, yes?
Yeah, I think so. And to be fair, yes, they clearly weren't incentivized to win a ton of games at the very end unless you just abide by the momentum philosophy. But even so, there still is a big picture outlook with LaMelo because this man is a $200 million man, and you want him to be the face of your franchise, hopefully alongside Brandon Miller. And so it makes sense. The guy just couldn't come back and really gain a rhythm, and that's been the case since he suffered his first ankle injury in October of the 2022 preseason. So he goes out with that injury. After he suffered that ankle injury, returns for 3 games, goes back out, 19 games out, 14 out, 15 gone. Last time we see him on the court, he returned for just 7 consecutive games. So when he comes back, Josh, he doesn't come back for a very long time, and I imagine it's hard to gain a rhythm. Think back to last year. When he got hurt, he was putting up monster numbers.
Huge.
But it took him like 7 games to knock off some serious shooting woes before he really started to get cooking, and that's what's been so frustrating. We see the talent. We know how special he is, but the ankle injuries have been the thing that's holding him back. And there's been some frequents too, where I think it was, I always forget which one it was, but it was either him landing on PJ Washington's foot or PJ Washington landing on LaMelo's foot. But either way, that was kind of a freak one. There was one where LaMelo was trying to save a ball going out of bounds.
The guy in the crowd, yeah.
Yeah, right. He steps on a guy on the sideline's foot. So, okay, so now there's two other people's foot's problems that are now causing LaMelo to suffer an injury. There was the one that is basketball play where he just twisted.
Yep.
We were told that LaMelo was going to wear some ankle braces at the beginning of last season. He was saying he was going to give that a shot. I asked him in November. It was an interview with me on WFNZ. He was like, hey, are you wearing ankle braces? Because we really couldn't see him. He's like, nah, not wearing them. I was okay. Like, did you wear them at the beginning of the season and decide to take them off? He's like, nah, I never went through with it. I think part of it is because it hurts. It's uncomfortable. He's got the metal rod in there. Like he's had surgery before, and he's, talking about how uncomfortable it is and how it's in his head. But then they just put out a video a couple weeks ago, and it looks like he's wearing ankle braces. So we'll see. They have a new training staff. I have to imagine after suffering like 5 different ankle injuries, that now's the time we're going to try to prevent it as much as possible. And even if he gets injured again, it's not going to be for a lack of trying to prevent it. This time they're going to have the ankle braces on. At least that's the hope. So we'll see. But man, we know how talented he is. The numbers were crazy when he got hurt. And I think as long as he's healthy, he's in store for a big season.
I guess we can't sit here and predict if he's going to get hurt or not. Like, that stuff happens. Like, you can jump on a person in the crowd at any point. Like, these random things happen. I guess more my question is here is that last season we got to, like, I don't know, maybe it was the start of October, and Steve Clifford just said, oh, yeah, Melo's going to be on, like, a minutes limit. He went, excuse me? Like, what are we talking about here? Then he was. Like, he played, like, limited minutes, and as you said, he had that rust that he just wasn't there, and he was playing, like, 28, 29 minutes a night. Like, he didn't have any surgery this offseason, so I guess we're not expecting that, like, restriction to be in play through training camp, are we?
I don't think so. I haven't heard anything about it. Anytime that we've talked with Charles Lee or anytime that he's spoken about LaMelo, he said that he's good to go. He's ready. Haven't heard anything as far as the setback goes with LaMelo. So I think as long as Charles Lee doesn't have just some kind of overly cautious preventative measure with LaMelo and a minutes restriction, we haven't heard anything about it if he does.
That does bring me to talk about Charles Lee. It's really hard to gauge an impact of a new coach who's never been a head coach before. In Lee, his name has been bandied about for many years as a top assistant and getting interviews, and now he finally gets this chance. I'll throw this one thing out there. Is that one of the things we saw with James Borrego coaching the team, and then Steve Clifford would come in, and one of the hallmarks of Steve Clifford's game was, we're not playing fast, we're slowing the pace down. That really took hold in year 2 versus year 1. Year 1 of stint 2 and then year 2 of stint 2. Like, he brought that pace way back down, where the Hornets used to be one of the fastest teams in the NBA. Is there any indication that Charles Lee will, like, reverse course on that and say, okay, no, we've got LaMelo Ball, we've got Miles Bridges, we've got Brandon Miller, let's ramp this thing back up?
It's the first thing he mentions when you bring LaMelo up. If you don't ask about how's he doing health-wise, you say, hey, what are your thoughts on LaMelo? What are your visions for him? He said that he's going to help with pacing. It's all about pacing with LaMelo. So I imagine that to go right back up. And LaMelo already, just with the style that he plays, it's going to be hard to play slow with LaMelo. And even with some Clifford stuff, when he was in the game, like, you saw the offensive numbers even with Cliff, right? His MO has always been low turnover, top 10 defense. You had the one playoff year where they were top 10 in both, and that was always a goal for Cliff, and he knew how important both things were. But it was always going to be their identity was stopping the other team and not turning the ball over. Well, even with LaMelo, he's like, all right, like, this is what am I supposed to do? I mean, he is a one-man fast break. He's going to throw it, 3/4 of the court to try to get an advantageous bucket in transition. Like, this is how we'll roll. I expect Charles Lee to press the gas a little harder, especially with the way every time you bring LaMelo up, it's about his defense, saying they're working on that, and that he's got to get better on that end of the floor. And it's also about the pacing on offense.
So last season they had a pace of 97, which was 19th. The year before they were at 101, which was 8th. So that's the year 1 of Clifford versus year 2. So he sort of brought it back down, but again, there was less LaMelo Ball for a lot of that season. And that's key to getting more numbers in. Now, in terms of looking at a player to watch for this season, Walker, we've mentioned his name already a couple of times this season, or not this season, in this show, and that is the second-year player Brandon Miller, who He started out last season coming off the bench, which was relatively predictable given the other players who were around there with Gordon Hayward there. And he sort of struggled, I thought, at times early on to sort of find his rhythm. Then Terry Rozier got traded. He stepped into a larger role. His usage went up. I still think there were, everyone has been very universally positive about Brandon Miller, and rightfully so. It's exciting to have a player like this. But I thought there was still some things that, obviously, he's a rookie, that he needs to work on. Like some of his efficiency stuff was relatively inconsistent. He had this usage of 25%. But how does that work when we do get a full season of LaMelo Ball there? Like, where does he, you said you expect a usage increase. So, who's the one who loses out? Does Miles Bridges go back to being a less than 20% usage guy? How does that all work together? Because I thought at times when Miller was tasked with a lot more of that responsibility, some of the efficiency stuff did start to fall off a bit there.
Yeah, I think he will be set up more. And so, with the usage, it might not be a ton more that it goes up. I just think he's too talented, Josh. He was such a bright spot for this team. Also in clutch moments, it did not matter how well he shot in the first half or in the first three quarters. When you needed a bucket, you went to Brandon Miller, and he delivered for you quite a bit, which was something we were really excited about here in Charlotte, especially for a rookie being the guy that you depended on. So many people discussed his maturity as far as kind of barking at some of the vets to get back and transition defense. Now, granted, it's not like he was perfect at it, but even still, there were some times where he was back, nobody else was, and people loved it with him. You could hear it. The hot mic picked it up, cursing out some of the vets for not getting back on time. I think that stuff will be interesting to see with his development. So Brandon Miller offensively, some of the stuff that he needs to work on. One, rail thin. We know how small he is in girth. He's fine with 6'9". We'll take that. But I think some of that size affects him getting to the basket. He'll dunk on you, but he needs a little bit of a runway to go dunk on you. If you put a body on him, then it's going to be hard for him to rise with some of the physicality. And I don't know how much of the short area, quick burst that he has to get around you, but his handles are really nice. And so I feel good about stationary ball handling. I feel good about him keeping the basketball, and being able to pull up from different spots on the floor. Charles Lee talked about him taking that step back and turning some of those mid-range jumpers into three-point jumpers. I think LaMelo is going to help a lot with that, where now LaMelo can create, he can kick out to Brandon. You're hoping for the catch and shoot opportunity to be there. And we know about that ability, very good at knocking it down. So I think offensively he'll help with that. But yeah, with the Miles stuff, that's what's interesting. I think we found out, right?
Yes.
Maybe not found out.
No, I think you're right. I think I know where you're going. I think you're right.
Right. With Miles, with him having the basketball in his hands a ton, there's certainly a limit as to how much production you're going to get. We can go back to 2 years ago, balls out, Mitch Kupchak at the podium basically tells you we're going to give him the max, and then he gets arrested for felony domestic violence, misses 92 games, including the first 10 of this past season. But he's in the 99th percentile on dunks and threes for minutes at his position. He just constantly played. So the volume is going to be there, but the efficiency took a dip. We have an outlier three-point shooting season. Now he's not even finishing all that well at the rim. He settled for a lot of mid-range jumpers, and he's not hitting a lot of mid-range jumpers. So you're probably going to take the ball out of his hands quite a bit with LaMelo and Brandon as your backcourt players, especially with Josh Green not really being a high usage guy. That's why I think you'll see an uptick with Brandon. Of course, you're going to get a lot with LaMelo. I think Miles comes down. I think you're talking about a lot of two-man game with Mark Williams, maybe on some pick and roll stuff with LaMelo. So that's how I envision the offense working. But Brandon has a real shot to be one of these all-star caliber players. And I think if we're asking why are we watching Brandon, it's to see a big ascent into, we might just get an all-star appearance for him in year 3, or even maybe flirt with that type of appearance in year 2.
That's interesting. Obviously, I do think that a guy heading into year 2 is going to take steps forward. His efficiency was also pretty good as a rookie. There was some flashes with some of the assist numbers, which is interesting. But it is going to require Miles Bridges coming back to being that third piece. Because you're right, Bridges did struggle in that role, and he just topped out at mid in doing that. It was okay, you said it, a lot of minutes leads to a certain level of numbers, but it's basically through minutes. Like didn't finish that well at the rim. His 3-point shooting has been bad apart from one season, which I think was that the season, the no crowd season? I think it might have been.
It actually was. It was actually 3 years ago, right? So we know about the one. It was actually, we know about the good season where he was flirting with an all-star appearance, but I think it was the year before that. It was because it was so good at the rim, and we didn't get the burst. The athleticism, we take some hits for this, but like Miles Bridges is somebody that lost quite a bit of that athleticism compared to what we had seen. Just, a real leaper. And last year, I think that probably hurt his finishing numbers.
And his block numbers fell dramatically as well last season. His block percentage was always in the 2s, and then it was 1.2. Now, some of that can be because of the usage went up, but also he just, again, you didn't play for a year, so there's going to be drop-offs, but he just wasn't quite exactly the same. And that's okay because he doesn't need to be the number 2 guy, and he shouldn't be the number 2 guy on this team. That is going to be Brandon Miller. Now, the make or break guy, we didn't talk about this guy in the injury update section because I knew we were going to be doing it here because, I planned out the show. Let's talk about Mark Williams, who I thought last season Walker started out pretty well. He was the starting center when I had dug on at the start of the year because there was the nonsense at the end of his rookie season where they were doing that 3-man center rotation where it was him and Richards and Jones. And it's like, you play 2 games and sit one, and they'll try, and people were worried about minute split, and Doug was like, no, look, Mark Williams is the guy who pushed towards 30 minutes. And he played 27 minutes a game, and then we all know the doubtful story. Okay, so what actually is going on with his back? Is there any worries of a recurrent problem here that's going to linger into this season, or is it just again, one of those ones hey, we don't really know what's going on, we'll see how it is, but don't hurry back, we'll get you ready for next season?
No, I think he'll be ready at the start of the season. Everything seems fine with him. We haven't heard any setbacks for Mark as of this offseason goes, but man, we were so in the dark with his injury. They were reporting it something differently. He goes out for a game, doesn't look good, goes back to the bench, and then he's out for the rest of the year. And it was, because of that back issue. Everybody hates hearing about the back issues with the big guys, and for good reason. But I think they were trying to dodge surgery. That makes a lot of sense. And much like we were discussing with LaMelo, if you're not really incentivized to win and hurt your lottery odds, well, all right, let's just go ahead and sit Mark Williams, even if it means that the Hornets are super small and having to start Grant Williams at 5. And if it ain't Nick Richards, then you got a 6'5" dude playing the 5 position. So even if that was the case, we're going to try to get Mark ready for the upcoming season. And Steve, after an Orlando game, I remember asking him, hey, how in the world do you make up for the lack of size? He's like, well, we're not going to have Mark for the rest of the year. Really? Okay. That's brand new information. So eventually that would be true. I'm really high on Mark. I think this is somebody that has enough perimeter defensive ability to where he's not going to be played off the court if hypothetically we could ever get to the postseason here in Charlotte. But in reality, we know he's going to be a big time rim protector. If you see just watching him with his 9'9" standing reach, just super long, right? Just a monster down there. Guards feel his presence as soon as they touch the paint. And you can see some of that second, hesitant decision making. And that's all you need, right? Yeah. If you have somebody that's in your head that much, the block percentage only being in the 50th percentile among centers, according to Dunks and Threes, okay, but man, he deters you quite a bit. Just watching it. Maybe even the rim deterrence numbers don't pick it up as much as watching these guards feel his presence and then dribble right back out of the paint. I think Charles Lee has talked about his rim protection, how much he likes that. I've asked Charles Lee, too, about the three-point shooting touch with Mark. The guy has a nice jumper. We saw it on display just a tiny, tiny bit 2 years ago. Phoenix comes to mind when he knocked down a couple 15-footers. The free throw percentage was pretty good at college. It's fine, 70%, I believe, in the NBA. I asked him about the over-under mark on three-point attempts from Mark Williams this year. And I asked him if we should set it over 10. He said, yeah, absolutely. Set the over-under over 10 attempts from Mark Williams. So we'll see if we have a shooting big man that can also protect the rim. And I think that it's going to be Lob City between LaMelo and Mark. Really a high efficient guy. Remember, he had that crazy streak of every game where he shot 80% or better from the field. He had some crazy consecutive field goals made streak going on before he got hurt. It's all about physicality, staying on the court. those are the big questions for Mark. But I'm high on what he could mean to an NBA team going into the postseason. I think there's a lot of value here, and I'm just hoping he can stay on the court and be healthy.
Yeah, that's really going to be the concern, I guess, is that people are going to be worried about the back problem, rearing its head again. But I don't. There's no question to me that like it's him over Nick Richards. There'll be some who go, oh, but what? Like, there's absolutely zero question about this whatsoever. And they'll probably be a little bit cautious with some of the minutes, I would guess. Yeah, especially through the early portion of the season. He's never going to be a 35-minute a night player. But 28, 29 is I think what the aim should be at some point during this year. And we just hope that we don't get any of this. And yeah, back to the earlier point you mentioned about me calling out the Hornets social media team, like quoting, it's obviously not me calling them out. My problem with all of this is not that it matters. It does matter for fantasy, but that's also not really the point. I think it puts ridiculous amount of pressure and negativity on the players because bro, you just got a bruise on your back. Why aren't you playing? The amount of stuff that I saw directed towards Mark Williams or LaMelo Ball, because they just say, sore back. Bro, you got a sore back. You're getting paid $4 million. I got a sore back. I got to go work and do this. And it's ridiculous to me that they don't see that the way that makes the player look and puts that pressure mental on them and that sort of stuff that comes towards them. Where this is not a team where you're hiding trade secrets that, well, what if I tell them that Mark Williams is out, then maybe we don't win the title this year. Like, that's not going to happen. My problem with it, again, is lack of transparency. It's blatant lying, but it's also just, it is bad for your players. And that's part of where that came to. So hopefully with everything sort of changing in-house with a lot of this stuff, that we can move away from some of that stuff. Because again, I was never calling out the social media team or the players. It's like, this is bad for the players.
Right. No, everything has changed. So that's the hope. I mean, it is I would say gut job, but gut job means like you removed everything. Mitch Kupchak is still in the building, but he's not a decision maker anymore. Steve Clifford still in the building, but he's a scout. He wants to be involved in the draft. And honestly, like with the draft record for him, the track record with Cliff, wanting Donovan Mitchell, liking Brandon Miller in the Brandon Scoot debate, like there's some early wins for him. Either way, every decision maker, guys that matter, the things that you're going to see, that's all changed. And that's including the training staff. And some of the points you bring up at looking bad on your players, yeah, Gordon Hayward's wife called the team out because of that stuff. You know, she took to social media and said, guys, this isn't consistent messaging. Gordon Hayward was dealing with this specific thing, and yet you gave the message as to it being something different. Nah, man, Gordon Hayward is out because the dude is really hurt, and they need to salvage as much reputation as possible with Gordon having not played like over 50, 55 games in any of the seasons that he played here in Charlotte. So, yeah, it's frustrating, and I'm hoping that changes. We seem to be getting like more of the fan access with some of the digital stuff that they're releasing. I'm hoping that messaging is more thorough. Like some of the stuff they're being a little bit more, close to the vest on, but time will tell, right? Like we're only going through, one off season where these people are really putting their fingerprints all over the organization. So time will tell on messaging as we move on.
Well, look, it's really hard to look at this team and see a new owner, a new GM, a new training staff, a new head coach. And I can't imagine all those guys coming and go, all right, guys, everything was working so well before. Let's just copy everything they were doing. Because, if they do all the same stuff, I go, well, who's behind this? Who is creating this? This is what we need to do. This is Hornets basketball. Because none of it makes sense. There's zero logic that this stuff and the way that they've handled this could continue, considering all the major players are gone. And it didn't go well doing it that way the first time. So we'll see. Again, it's right. At this point, you have to prove it to us. But maybe they do prove it to us. This is you very rarely get that combination, Walker, of owner, head coach, GM all coming in within like an 18-month period of a full, complete reset. We've got it here, and that means there are no excuses for things not to change. Now, your bold prediction for this season was that LaMelo Ball flirts with an all-NBA type season. Now, I like that you put the word type in there because that doesn't... sometimes getting into the All-NBA team, there are many things.
Yeah, you're a vet, right? Like you're a vet. We got a little cushion. It sounds bold, and then it's like, okay, like type. There's just a little cushion for me to land on here.
Yep. Like if he averages 25, 7, and 8, you go, oh, good for all NBA in most seasons, but
that's right.
it might not make it there. But it's more just like, this is the level of production you get to, like this level of being able to hit 37% from three and make three a game and play all these games. I think that, again, you said it as well, like once he knocked off that minutes restriction rust, it was flying last season. Like those numbers were crazy. He was generating defensive events. He was shooting well. He was just dominating the play basically, and then he went down again. So I think people have forgotten a little bit about what LaMelo does. And yesterday I put a question out on Twitter asking for people to respond to who the most overrated player in the NBA is, and a lot of people said it's LaMelo. And I go, okay,
yeah,
maybe you have this idea. Of course, he has the cars and the branding and the attitude that people see, but like he's actually like unbelievably good when he plays, and he dragged this team into that play-in game for 2 years when he's not there that they don't remotely come close to sniffing it. And there are very many people, Walker, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, that are very quick to say, well, no, Brandon Miller's the best player on this team now and it's his team, and I don't agree with that. So I think that Ball is that guy, and for them to be successful, he actually does need to get to this level.
I think there's a very real possibility that LaMelo Ball could be an all-NBA type player. Like you get it from some of these more so offensive centric. Yes, there's some stuff to be desired defensive guys, but if the numbers are so big and then you start to have a team that outperforms expectations, in the Hornets case, maybe they get through the play-in tournament and use that as a vehicle to get to the playoffs, to get somewhere and actually get a 4-game series. Then now you have a little bit of the narrative, oh, Charlotte, they're in the playoffs. How'd they do that? Oh, LaMelo's 25, 7, and 8. Oh, hell yeah. Or even like getting up there a little bit more with the assists, because now you have some talent with the Mark Williams 2-man game, Brandon Miller knocking down shots on catch and shoot opportunities. LaMelo matters so much to this team offensively, and Josh, he always has. He did as soon as he stepped foot on the NBA court as a rookie. And you're right. I've said that phrase a million times. People forget. It's become a Twitter joke. People forget when he was a bucket. Like, people do. People do forget that LaMelo Ball flipped the exact – like, the narrative about LaMelo, this flashy behind-the-back pass guy, it was empty calorie stats. No, man, you go back and you look at some of the national NBA pundits, the reason that LaMelo won Rookie of the Year, it was because he affected winning. It wasn't even the empty calorie stuff. It was because he was making winning plays. And defensively, he's got to get better. You would love to see him get to the rim more, finish at the rim a lot better, because that's been a real problem. He actually got there a lot better last year. Just wasn't finishing. But, man, this team is leaps and bounds. They're in a different galaxy offensively when he's on the floor. You look at some of the percentiles for offensive EPM, like 97th, 94th, 95th, just ridiculous numbers. And I think the scoring output for him, especially if that three-point percentage goes up with more talent around him as well, I think the efficiency from deep, if he gets to the foul line, which he was starting to get to the foul line a little bit more last year too, which was a nice uptick as well, I think it's very easy to see him put together a really impressive box score. I mean, for fantasy purposes, if you were, you know about this way better than I do, obviously, I would imagine if you want a guy that can fill up the box score, like LaMelo would be able to do the stat sheet thing all across the board. If you guaranteed him playing 65 games, if you met that quota, yeah, watch out for a monster season. If the Hornets win on top of that and sneak into the playoffs somehow, now you have a little bit of the narrative reasoning too. That's prime for immediate all-star appearance. You don't even have to really think about it. But also, like, now you that one final spot in a third-team All-NBA where you get some of these weird players that sneak in. Kemba Walker was one of those players his last year here in Charlotte. Maybe LaMelo can follow in those footsteps.
Yeah, look, people know that for fantasy, his per-game numbers are equivalent to like a first-round player. Like, there's no real question about that. And if he plays 60-plus games this season, I think this team is very clearly in that play-in discussion. Like, they are better than Washington and Detroit very clearly. They'll be much better than Brooklyn. Like, it might be hard to be a very clear top 8 team, but yeah, they should be able to push into that 9-10 spot. Yeah, they'll be better than Chicago, I think, pretty comfortably as well, which does bring us to talk about the prediction for the team's record. Walker, you gave us a 34-48 win prediction. We have to be cautious, of course, with the injuries, the unknown of a new coach as well. But I think that is very reasonable. Of course, I thought that they could do that last year, and that didn't really come close to working out either. But,
injuries again. Yeah, that's how it is.
But we saw this last season, not just with the Charlotte Hornets, but there were multiple teams that improved or were worse than their previous season record by 15, 17 games. That happened multiple times. I've never seen a season with as many double-digit win changes from year to year, I think, as what I saw last season. And Charlotte won, I think, 21 games the year before. You've got them at 34. And I say 34 and go, yeah, but that could be 37 even. There's easy ways for that to get there. And we saw that with the Rockets. They brought in players to get there. The Hornets just get their best player back. Theoretically, they get their center back. They get year 2 of Brandon Miller, and that's how that rises up. And I find that it is easy to criticize the Hornets. It's easy to laugh at the Hornets. I'm sure you're well aware of this, that people do that. It's very easy to do that. But
yes,
I do think that there is a lot of easy picking sort of parts to look at and go, well, that this can very comfortably happen.
Absolutely. I just here's the list of the guys that played the most games for the Hornets last season. Yeah, you ready for this? Brandon Miller played 74. Miles Bridges played 69. That's with a 10-game suspension. Miles Bridges was next in line at 69 games played. The next guys that played the most amount of games, Nick Richards, 67. JT Thor, 63, not on the team.
Wow.
Bryce McGowan's 59, not on the team. Nick Smith Jr. might be in Greensboro at 51. You have to go to PJ Washington, who finishes above everyone else, who got traded.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's nuts to see just who was suiting up the most for this squad last year. It's really health that gets them. It's internal improvement, which is also very real, right? Mark Williams, internal improvement, Brandon Miller, first-round picks that theoretically could be maybe an all-star in Brandon Miller's case. Mark Williams, high-end starter, just your classic center that we want to have out there on the floor. LaMelo playing meaningful minutes. Miles Bridges going back to a role that better suits him. Josh Green coming in and giving you some point of attack defense. Also, just another shooter, corner 3 shooter. It's very, very easy. Those aren't hard things to think about in order to see the Hornets win, even 15 more games. This is a team, if they won 15 more games, well, now they're right there at 36, and that was where the Hawks finished last year, 36 and 46, the last team in the play-in. Yeah, easily I could see that.
Yep.
They got to stay healthy. They have not had injury luck on their side. I'm hoping things regress to the mean, but it didn't this year after they were really injury-ridden 2 years ago as well. But there's a lot of hope. I think the world of Charles Lee. He says all the right things. Everybody, you think about all the 60-win teams over the last 10 years, the Hawks, Milwaukee, Boston. Charles Lee was on every single one of those staffs. I'll take that. Taking a little bit from the Budenholzer tree, taking a little bit with a different experience with Joe Mazzulla, but they thought very highly of him in Boston. So I'm a fan of him. Jeff Peterson was going to get a job somewhere. He felt like the next in line guy, and Charlotte just capitalized on him. So it felt like the Hornets were doing the right stuff here, Josh. It was very weird to go to the National NBA podcast, read National NBA articles, and see constant good thing after good thing about their decision-making, which had been ridiculed and criticized for good reason in the past. That was not true of this year. It's very different, and I'm hoping that difference in feeling also leads to differences in wins.
Last thing, Walker, I have a quiz for you. It's not so much of a quiz versus just an excuse to test your knowledge and just talk about guys, because it's the 24-25 NBA season. In Charlotte Hornets history, there have been 14 players who have worn either number 24 jersey or number 25 jersey. So all I want you to tell me is who is the first player that comes to your mind that has worn either number 24 or 25 for Charlotte?
I'm actually terrible at at unis. I think of Brandon Miller, but 24. Is that it?
That's
is
it.
Brandon
Miller's 24. Yeah, he's 24.
Okay, yeah, that's it. Okay,
easy.
Yeah.
And then you had
that was easy.
PJ wearing 25 last year.
That's right.
Al Jefferson was 25, and then of course, Mason Plumlee wore 24, which I found out yesterday. I don't know if you know this. Do you know why Mason Plumlee wore number 24?
Do I know why he wore number 24?
I didn't know. I didn't know there was a reason. I mean, I was talking to I think it was Mike Richmond yesterday from Locked On Blazers, and he was like, that Mason Plumlee had to change his number because he wore number 24 because of Kobe, and then when Kobe died, he couldn't wear number 24 anymore. Which Mason Plumlee being inspired to wear Kobe's number was just crazy to me that was the reason. But that's why he wore number 24 apparently.
Oh, I mean, I guess you haven't seen Plum Dog take somebody off the dribble from the elbow and then shoot a lefty J. Like, I can see it.
I've seen him shoot left-handed free throws. I saw him do that a couple of times. And
me and my girlfriend, I kid you not, we have matching Mason Plumlee left-handed jumper T-shirts. Oh, yeah. That is a real thing wow. That both of us have in our repertoire.
Mason Plumlee is an interesting character. But Walker, I don't think we need to talk too much more about Mason Plumlee because he doesn't play for the Hornets anymore. But what we do need to talk about is you need to tell me what is happening over at Locked On Hornets at the moment.
Oh, man, it's silly season. So, I mean, it's what we do best. Me, my co-host, Doug Branson, we're like finishing silly season projects that we started 2 years ago. One of them is Who Wore It Best, where we decide what Hornet wore that jersey number the best during their time in Charlotte. We're doing Hornets grids. We're doing a bunch of fun stuff. But also we're keeping you up to date, of course, on everything happening here in Hornets land, whether it be the Vasa Micic trade rumors, whether it be the kind of season we expect from LaMelo, whether he could get one of those All-NBA nods. Brandon Miller, is it possible for him to jump all the way into All-Star contention his second year in the league? We've seen players do it before. Could he possibly be the next? We're hoping to grow, and we're Locked On Hornets is hoping to grow alongside the Hornets as well. So follow us at Locked On Hornets, at Walker Mehl, Doug Branson, LOH on Twitter as well, and we'll keep you up to date on everything happening in the Queen City.
And now you can give Doug that little Mason Plumlee jersey number nugget as well when you're talking about best players to wear number 24.
That's true. He's going to love it. He loves that kind of stuff too, so he's going to eat that up. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Maybe Mike was just completely lying to me, but apparently that is the reason. So, I'm waiting to see Doug's reaction. Walker, thank you again for coming on and chatting about the Charlotte Hornets with me.
Yeah, appreciate it, Josh. Thanks again, man.
And that does it for the Charlotte Hornets season preview. I know there are going to be plenty of you watching this, but LaMelo's a bum. You can't trust him. Never drafting him. I will if he's available in the third round of a fantasy draft, that is the easiest call you'll ever make. And I think he's going to end up being a pretty comfortable second round guy in terms of where he goes in drafts. How everything else fits in, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams. There's a lot of interesting things on this team, as you heard me and Walker talk about. If you want to hear me talk about more different things, well, the easiest way to keep up is subscribing and double banging and thumbing up and all that sort of stuff. Basketball Monster open. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.